Welcome to Hacking Your Leadership. I'm Chris.
And I'm Lorenzo.
And welcome to this week's Thoughtful Thursday. Don't forget to follow us on Instagram at Hacking Your Leadership and leave us a review on iTunes. Also, please check out our YouTube and Patreon pages. They're in the podcast description below. For this week's Thoughtful Thursday, I want to talk about a post I saw on LinkedIn from Zeta Yarwood. I've been following her for probably a number of years now. She's an executive coach, career coach, life coach, that kind of person. She has a lot of great LinkedIn content, and she posted a poll last week talking about toxic leadership. She gave an example about a person being a toxic leader and what it leads to in the organization. And the question basically was, what should you do with this person? Should you fire them or should you coach them? And knowing that the coaching may land on deaf ears, or that they might say, I don't need coaching, or whatever that is. And the answers kind of ran the gamut. There were some pretty convincing answers that said, insist on coaching or fire them, or, whatever it is. And so what I'm wondering is, have you ever had a person report to you that was a toxic leader, and you really had to struggle with what you would lose by getting rid of them, but what you're losing by keeping them?
Yeah, well, I think it's, undeniable on what you lose when you keep toxic leaders in your business.
Sure.
I think we all know that that's the negative impact it has on a team, on a culture, and on an environment. I think specific to her post and what I've seen is that if you have a toxic leader who's been around for a long time, and it's kind of like a known toxic leader, and somebody who's, you can say high achiever. That's kind of like the basic expectation of why anybody would allow a toxic leader to stay involved in a business, is of like that kind of what you said, which is like, how long are you willing to allow them to be toxic if you view them as somebody who is producing output that's beneficial to the organization?
Sure. Right? If you're not outputting and you're toxic, you're gone anyway.
You're gone anyway, right? Exactly,
yeah,
right.
Yeah.
So those two things are kind of married together, right?
Sure.
The real question in my mind is that if you have a toxic leader on your team or in your organization and they've been there for a long time, it's actually not about that leader. It's about the organization's culture. It's about the larger organization that's allowed that toxic leader to stay employed and to have a negative impact over time. And that's the real heart of the issue. It's very easy, I think, for us to point at the one leader and be like, they should get fired, or they should be coached, or whatever the case is, and they've been here a really long time. The real question is, though, why have they been allowed to stay there that long? And what's the larger thing that should be discussed? Because sure, if you move that person out of the business, great. But if the environment and the culture is still such that allows for those behaviors to exist as a result of their performance, then I think you have a much larger problem, and it's never going to get any better. You're just going to replace toxic person number one with less toxic person number two until they become more toxic person number one.
Yeah, I think there are two things that kind of jumped out at me when I was thinking about this. One, if you fire somebody for behavior that they have, in essence, gotten away with for a long time, there's no way that person leaves the organization with any thought other than blaming the people who fired him for the inconsistency. Like, it's less about there won't even be any ownership of the behavior. It'll be, what is with this? This is the exact same way I've done things for a long time. Why all of a sudden is it a problem now? And to be perfectly honest, no matter how bad a leader that person is, they're right. They're right. Why is it a problem now when it wasn't for 1 year or 20 years or however long it is? That's the first thing that I would think. The second thing is that when that happens and that person goes to another organization, they're going to be that same person. Like, you've done nothing to stop the spread of that anyway. Now, you can say that's not my problem. I need to worry about my organization. Sure, I guess. But if you are trying to get rid of a person because they are toxic and they don't fully grasp and believe in the reasons that they were terminated because of that toxicity, wherever they land, wherever they go, they're going to bring that behavior with them, and it's going to spread, and they're going to just affect another round of employees. And because even though people change jobs a lot, they don't change industries a whole lot. You never know. Things come full circle. You can end up, taking on a person who was reported to this person. It's just, the world is pretty small. So I don't like the idea of shirking a problem onto another organization just because it's easier to get rid of a person anyway.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think that it's if you're going to be a leader in that environment, right? And again, I think the post was like, as a consultant who is then coaching people that work for a toxic leader, the question is absolutely the right question, which is, why are you not spending time with that leader? Like, that's actually the person who needs the coaching, right? And if that's not a thing that can happen, then clearly there's an organizational problem. That's very, very clear to me. I think in this aspect, really thinking about what is toxic, and then also, like, what is, how do you define people that need growth and development and coaching? Because I think sometimes you can have overlap where what seems like toxic behavior is also something of somebody making a mistake as a leader, as a new leader, as somebody who maybe is still working on how am I more approachable? How do I make sure that I'm being more fair and equitable in regards to performance and promotion? Like, there's a lot of things that you have to learn as a leader, and learning those things means you're going to make some mistakes along the way. And so I think it's important as a leader, if you have people on your team that may be viewed as toxic, to really dig deep into understanding, is that really a toxic person and a toxic leader, or is this somebody who's stumbling through, making some mistakes, and they need more coaching, they need more mentorship, they need more examples, they need more time in a role to figure it out. Maybe they need to work with a different team. They don't have the personal relationships that become strained as they progress in their career. But there's a lot of work that you have to do as a leader to make sure that you are defining it appropriately, and that you understand the difference between a leader who is making mistakes and learning, and somebody who's just a toxic leader.
I also think that there's this this is the kind of thing where a lot of organizations kick the can down the road. And so what happens is they allow the behavior to continue when there's some subjectivity to it, when the person hasn't crossed a line that you can't step back from. There's like, well, what was their intent? What was the, you can always like rationalize it away. And then what happens is they cross a line that can't be stepped back from. It doesn't matter what their intent was, that whatever they said or did it is a career-ending move for at least at this organization. And so you move forward with it saying, well, that's what they did it. What can you do? You can't stop it. Well, yeah, but that's like saying that you escalated a situation for an hour, and then when a person reacts in a way that allows you to shut them down, now you're justified in shutting them down. It's like, yeah, I guess if you look at that 10 seconds, but if you look at the broader relationship as a whole, what could have been done in the previous hour or previous week or month or year to make it so it never got to that point? And I just think there are a lot of people who don't. It's just harder to look at it through that lens when you think, well, I don't have. It's easier for me to be a kind of a lackadaisical leader here and not make those tough decisions or have those tough conversations, when that is. So I want to kind of tease something here. Have you ever had to have a tough conversation with an employee when they've been allowed to act a certain way or do some things for a while, and maybe you inherited a team or you got to a team and you started noticing this, and it's like, well, wait a minute, why isn't anybody talk to I want to ask you how that conversation went with that employee for that first time. But first, I want to give it up to a word from our sponsors. All right, Lorenzo. So have you ever had to have a conversation with an employee who's been allowed to act a certain way for a long time, and you get in the team and it's like, well, why isn't anybody talk to this person? What did that first conversation with that employee look like?
Well, I'll start with the time it happened to me.
All right.
Yeah, I've shared in the podcast, and people that know me know that I lead a lot of times with humor. And sometimes that humor has a range of both effectiveness and acceptance in regards to what is funny to some people is not funny to everybody. And so I've had to have that conversation, in my career, of making sure and being conscious of environment and of people and of humor. And look, I've had that conversation in all directions. I've had direct leaders, talk to me about it. I've had peers of mine talk to me about it. I've had employees of mine talk to me about it. And it's something that I'm aware of. It's something that I don't necessarily feel is toxic, but it's one of those things that can be, especially if you are making jokes at people's expenses, and it's not appreciative, or that they feel a certain way about it. And so, like, those are things that even in all of my tenure, that from time to time I probably push the limits on. But again, like I think that could be a hard conversation for anybody to have, especially if if they have a lot of respect for you, or they feel like there's so much good that you do. This is one thing that you have to be conscious of as a leader talking to people. Absolutely. I've had times where I've had supervisors, and specifically sometimes in the sales arena or the operations arena, where you have leaders that are very like, go get this, you must do that. And they're very directive. And while I think that there's a lot of good things that come out of clarity of expectations and wanting to, to do our best every single day, you have to balance that with a whole lot of recognition. And you got to make sure that those people that are working hard, that are getting better, that are showing up every day and taking that direction, are also feeling good about the progress that they're seeing. But many times that's where I've had to step in as a leader. Is like, look, you've been really driving or pushing this team or setting this bar very high, or being just too directive of a leader without the balance of making sure that they're growing, that they're developing. You're not taking into account how they feel. You're not including them in some different or innovative ways, because maybe this leader, like, the way that you do it is the only way that it can be done, which is out of fact. And so I've had to have those types of conversations with leaders. And the hard part of those conversations isn't necessarily sitting down and talking to them about, like, giving somebody feedback or talking to them about what you've observed. It's helping them to connect the dots so they see it themselves. Like, that's really the hardest part of the conversation, is that we can get caught up in our own mind so much that if we can't attach that feeling of how it feels to be somebody who works for them, then it can be really difficult to get them to come around and to understand how their behaviors need to change or adjust.
Right. I mean, the first step to solving a problem is admitting there is one, and if you can't get them to admit there is one, then that's an issue. So the last thing I want to ask you about this is that, clearly something happened the very first time someone sat down with you to say, hey, the way that you're leading, your kind of go-to of humor to kind of diffuse a situation, or to bring some lightheartedness to a situation, while it may work in some situations, in others it makes people feel like whatever they're going through, you're not taking it seriously, or whatever it is. Something was said to you in that the first time you heard that led you to leave that meeting not thinking, go to hell, like that's ridiculous that you would tell me that, and instead you went, oh, I can see how this would be I could see where you're coming from. What was it that a leader said to you, or a person said to you, that kind of led you to take it the right way and to consider that going forward, as opposed to feeling like, getting defensive and telling them that they shouldn't be telling you what they're telling you?
Yeah, well, I think they started the conversation with walking me through how it's a strength of mine and how it's something that brings a lot of value to a team, as a peer, as a leader, that type of stuff. And we talked a lot about how humor is super helpful in building culture and making sure that people don't take themselves too serious, and that there's a lightness to the things that we do. Yes, we want to work hard, but we also want to have a lightness and some fun. Like, having fun is a big part of the work that we do. They said, but you have to also think about, right, times when and again, like, this is kind of why I mentioned earlier, times when maybe somebody else was having a good time or making a joke or having fun, and I wasn't either in the mood for it, or I wasn't ready for it, or I was thinking about something else, and how did that make me feel, right? So again, they attached it to my own feelings of times in my life when maybe it wasn't a good time for a joke or that type of thing. And they said, so you just need to be conscious of that. And you need to make sure that when people want to come talk to you about things that are not necessarily funny or humorous or that are serious, that you are very quick to not try to make it light, that you allow the seriousness to kind of stay there, that you allow the conversation and the dialogue to be very in the moment and very real and very respectful. And not try to lighten up something, even if it is uncomfortable for people. Sometimes it's fine for there to be the uncomfortable moments of conversation so that it's clear that this is a serious conversation that needs to be addressed in a serious way. And so like that was kind of the advice that was given to me. And again, it was less about, oh, you're being toxic, you're not having an impact. It was more about mentoring me and helping me to observe it, to see it, to feel it, to understand it. So as I grew as a leader, I kind of knew how to make sure that I had a good balance of both.
Yeah, I think that's great. I think it really comes down to personal awareness and self-awareness of the situation. If a leader is unable to be aware of the issues, then it's going to be really difficult to get any type of change to happen. But if there is an inability to be aware of what's going on, it isn't necessarily just that person's fault. It could be a lot of the leadership is failing in making them self-aware of what things need to change.
Absolutely. And with that, it brings us to the end of this episode. This is Hacking Your Leadership. I'm Lorenzo.
And I'm Chris.
And have a great day.